Cappadonna, sitting here in the most trustworthy shop owner in Bloomfield. Of course, the owner of the Bloomfield Garage, which has been here forever. And everybody brings their car here, and it's all based on trust. Everybody, you drop your car off here, and you say, "What do I owe you?" But Francis didn't start this business, of course. This is a family business. Is that right, Francis? When did this business start?
Well, it started in 1920 when.
That's right, 100th anniversary.
100th anniversary this past year, and started in my hat too.
Right.
And, in 1924, my grandfather was a chauffeur in Hartford, and back in those days, it's my understanding that driveways and garages and houses were still kind of a new thing. So a lot of people kept their cars in like a central location. So in Congress Street there was like a garage there that had cars. So at that time he was still, I think, an active chauffeur, and then repairing the cars that were not only the car that he drove, but also repairing the cars that were in that garage. And then he had, by 1930, he was working for Pope Hartford.
What's that?
Pope Hartford was the automobile manufacturer that was located in Hartford at the time. I'm not exactly sure where it was located in Hartford, but they were manufacturing cars in Hartford. Over on Farmington Avenue, they actually have an old Pope Hartford in the showroom there. So as you walk into AAA in West Hartford on Farmington Avenue, on the left-hand side there's an automobile, and that's a Pope Hartford car.
It's a make of car.
It was a make of car. They were manufacturing. Yeah, Pope Hartford was a manufacturer of cars back then.
Oh my goodness, they manufactured them here in Hartford?
In Hartford, yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so he was working for Pope Hartford at the time, and apparently Colbro Tobacco, who owned pretty much, I think, most of Bloomfield and Windsor at that time, purchased a bunch of vehicles from Pope Hartford. Right. Not exactly sure if it were cars, trucks, or whatever, but they purchased a whole bunch of cars. And basically they wanted someone close to Bloomfield that could repair those cars. So my grandfather moved to Bloomfield.
So that's the connection. Okay, I always wondered.
Yeah, so he was down about where Philly Park is now, in a building that's had Bloomfield written on it. And I think it's the one, I've seen some aerial footage shots, and there's one that says Bloomfield literally says Bloomfield right on the roof of the car, on the roof of the building. I think it was painted on or something. So in 1937, when he went off on his own and built the facility here at Park Avenue, he carried that over as Bloomfield Garage.
I see. Dad was a grandpa. Grandpa?
Well, my grandfather, yeah.
He was a chauffeur.
He was a chauffeur.
And he was he a Hartford resident at that time, or was he a transplant from somewhere else?
He immigrated from Lithuania, I believe, in 1914, 15, somewhere in that ballpark.
I see.
Yeah, so he was maybe 17, 18, 19 years old when he came over. I believe if my math is correct, I believe he was born in 1895.
I see.
And he came over around 1914, I believe.
Huh.
And then I think he started in New York, and then moved to Hartford.
Was that grandfather or great grandfather?
Grandfather.
That's funny because you're a lot younger than I am, and I have a grandfather who was 1880s.
So my mother and father met when they were very young, but never dated until they were older.
Yeah.
So my father didn't marry until he was 37 years old, and didn't have me till he was 40s, which was ancient back in those days. Which was ancient back in those days. So that's part of it. My father was 80 when he passed, and that was in 2008. So
Okay.
that was a long time ago. So he
So,
would be,
were you so it means that you were Lithuanian on both sides of the family? Is that right?
no, actually, my 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 grandmother, my grandfather's wife was actually from I think County Mayo, Ireland.
Ah.
Yeah, so she was Irish.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
So and then ironically most of all of most of all of my family has married kind of like, at least the first generation in here had married Irish,
oh, yeah.
pretty much. So my uncle married an Irish woman, my father married an Irish woman,
Yeah.
um, and so on. So
I see. Um, that mix sounds like it started off as a mixed affair. And I say that because at the time, most families that I'm aware of kind of stayed in their clan, certainly in the 1920s or 30s.
right.
You kind of stayed in your clan, your comfort zone. Here, that wasn't the case, but then later on, the
So
Irish kind of took over, it sounds like.
yeah. So they met in New York. My grandfather was a chauffeur, and my grandmother was a domestic at the same house. So that's how they met.
I see.
So there was
I
probably
see.
a relationship born out of work.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
This sounds like Downton Abbey, you know.
I have
Very
seen
much the same kind of thing, Michelle.
I haven't seen it.
Okay. In any case, you yourself, Francis,
Yes.
are a Bloomfield boy.
Yeah, Bloomfield, born and raised. Yeah.
I see. If you don't mind, when did you graduate high school?
1986.
1986.
From Northwest Catholic.
Oh my! Oh, from Northwest.
Yeah.
Did you start out in the public school system in Bloomfield at all?
I did a schooling career in preschool over at the Congregational Church.
I see.
And
Still
then-
going.
And
Their-
yeah,
their
still
preschool
going.
is still going.
And then moved to J.P. Vincent, which was right up the road here, for kindergarten through fourth grade. So I was a walker from Prospect Street up, and then crossed over onto Turkey.
Did you grow up in this building? In the building that the garage is in?
No, I grew up two houses up at 80 Prospect.
80 Prospect.
Yeah, yeah,
Prospect's a lovely street.
yeah. A lot of people love it.
Yeah, it's a great street. There's a lot of nice things to see on Prospect. A lot of nice homes.
It's important to discuss. I think the kind of like a little bit of the lineage of the family too. From a business standpoint, my father is one of four. So the oldest Francis, who I'm named after, and he was killed in action in World War II in 1945. So he was, and it's kind of funny, it was to me. Actually, my cousin gave this to me. It's Shop Theory.
Henry Ford
Henry Ford Trade School. And if I flip
That's
it open,
amazing.
there's my uncle's.
Ah, my goodness.
My uncle's signature. So
Wow.
I looked at the copyright of the book. It's around 1941. So he would have been, if my math is correct, he would have been. I think he was born in 1923. So in 1941, he would have been 18 years old, just out of high school. Probably, I would guess my grandfather either got the book for him or sent him to Dearborn, Michigan, to go through the school and understand cars more. I'm not sure if there was like a technical automotive training institute at that point, other than maybe someplace like this to go to. So I don't know the exact origins. I just got in this book. I was going to try to investigate.
You
that.
just got this book.
I just got it a couple days ago.
Would you be willing to give it to the Historical Society? Just kidding.
I'm sure he was. I believe he was involved in the business until the time he left for World War II. I'm not exactly sure of the time frame of that. But when he was killed in 1945, I think my father was about 16 years old, maybe 16, 17 years old, and I think he was probably about a junior or senior in high school, and he left school to come work back in the business at that time.
I see.
And then he kind of, obviously continued on. So from 1945-ish right up until 1997. So that was his tenure here. So him and my uncle, basically, I think, my grandfather obviously was running things or involved in that process through, the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I think when, probably in the 60s and 70s, I think my father and my uncle were more involved in the day-to-day operations of it. My grandfather was starting to take a back seat and letting them run things.
Mm-hmm.
So it was my father, William, known as Bill, or as my grandfather used to call him, Wooly, which was his way of saying Billy or Willie. I can't remember. I can't figure out which one, but his Lithuanian accent. But he, they were integral in building. I mean, I was lucky enough to come into I was lucky enough in 1997 to basically step into a ready-made business that's been, that had an absolute fantastic reputation, and a long lineage of people doing service for the people of the town of Bloomfield, and being people of integrity and trustworthiness. That so it was an easy transition to make. I feel lucky that I didn't have to try to start this operation from the ground up. I think I always wonder in the back of my mind, if I had to do it, how would it end up? Would it have ended up the same? But I feel like I feel very lucky to have been able to step into it, and I'm proud that we've made it to 100 years. I think continuing on my grandfather's legacy.
The next 100.
We're working on it. As we sit here in our new building that was put up 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago now.
Yes, you went to Bloomfield Public Schools through the 4th grade, from
Correct.
preschool through the 4th grade.
Yep.
And after that?
So after that, our family was very involved with Sacred Heart Church.
I see.
And my father, my uncle, and the Donatellis in town, and the Sayadoffs in town were very integral in getting the Sacred Heart Church school going, starting it, and then trying to raise money to fund it and keep it going. So they were very integral in that. So I think our whole family that was living in Bloomfield at the time went through Sacred Heart School. So my uncle's 4 children that are older than I am all went through, and then myself and my sister went through. And my sister was actually the last 8th grade class of the Sacred Heart School.
And then after Sacred Heart, that didn't go through high school, did it?
No, it just went to 8th grade.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I was actually a freshman at my freshman year. I was at St. Thomas Seminary over on Bloomfield Avenue in Bloomfield.
Yes, I see.
So it was kind of like the same environment, a very smaller school, excellent education, all male, obviously, being a seminary. So
I have a question about seminaries.
Sure.
Does it mean you are on the track to become a priest?
So that's pretty much why it shut down. I think by 1982, when I went there, they were seeing that St. Thomas Seminary was being more used as sort of like a prep school as opposed to a seminary. Most of the kids that were going through the high school were not going into, the seminary, the advanced seminary to get involved in the priesthood. There were graduate students living at the seminary at that time, and maybe 1 or 2 of them had matriculated through St. Thomas, but they weren't getting the volume that they were thinking. So I think it was Archbishop. I can't remember which archbishop it was at the time, and decided to close the school at that time. Mm-hmm. The parents tried to see if they could turn it into a prep school and kind of lose the seminary portion of it and turn it into a prep school and pay more prep school tuitions. But the archdiocese wasn't really interested in that because they had already had the South Catholic, East Catholic, Northwest Catholic already in place. That they didn't want to. They didn't really need it, so they just distributed. So I ended up going from St. Thomas Seminary to Northwest Catholic.
I see. Yeah. And after high school?
Northeastern University.
Northeastern?
Yeah.
Well, did you graduate there?
I did.
So did my daughter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. It's got both It's in the city, and it's a beautiful campus.
It's in the city. It's a beautiful campus. What really attracted me to it was being a Boston Red Sox fan. The city really kind of interested me a lot, and but also the school for business management, and
Oh yeah.
the co-op program was very attractive to me.
So in those years that you were in Bloomfield, did you kind of leave after Northwest Catholic after high school, and then you went to Boston? And when did you move back? Right after college?
I did come back to. I came back to Bloomfield right after school.
I see.
There it was kind of a tough time to come back. There was a lot of, I came back in '91, literally like just before we graduated. I think Hartford, well, most of the insurance companies laid off tens of thousands of employees back in the early '90s.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very difficult time to come back from getting a job standpoint.
I see.
Yeah. So
Were you not always thinking of going into the family business?
I wasn't. I had a degree in finance at that point. My father knew that things were tough out there. It was a difficult environment, and basically he stated to me that the garage really couldn't afford to bring me into it at the time. They had kind of a full staff, and he wasn't going to let somebody else go to bring me in. He didn't feel that that was right to that person, and that he basically, I just had to kind of go out and find my own path. So
Yeah.
I was working retail for a while.
You did move back, and it was tougher times, and you got a series. Did it come up of becoming part of the family business again?
So my father had gotten throat cancer in 1995, and he survived surgery and all that kind of stuff, and was doing rehabilitation. He was able to come back. That was about summer of '95, and then was able to come back to spring of '96. And by probably the spring of '97, knew that he just couldn't because of the extent of the operation, the amount of time that he was down, the age at which it happened. He was like 68. He just physically couldn't recover well enough from a physical muscle standpoint to really do it anymore. It was tough because I think my grandfather worked until almost to the day he died in the family business. I think he kind of envisioned the same thing.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult for him to kind of, I think, step away. But he had, unfortunately, he just had to do it. So it was the right time to kind of, I was in a place where, things were kind of, plateauing in my career. At that point, I was working at an RV dealership. And things were kind of like, it was a good time for me to make a change, and it was a good time for him to make a change. So at that point, I agreed to come back to the family business.
And what about John? John is your uncle, is that right?
John is my uncle. Yep.
John Politis is who I'm referring to. Was he in the family business around the time that your dad backed out of it?
He was. So
Okay.
John, as far as I know, and I think if we have the opportunity, maybe we can do a Zoom call down to
Oh, I'd love to.
South Carolina and get a little bit more of this history. But I believe he came back in the family business in 1957. I think is when he came back.
So he was
Time. He actually just made the decision just a few weeks ago to finally kind of take a step out. And
I haven't seen him in a couple of years.
yeah, so he's 88 years old, and he's been, kind of in a diminished role over the last couple of years, but still in part of the business. And it's just recently decided to give my new partner Gary a chance to spread his wings a little bit and see how.
I'm glad you have I'm glad that Gary's your partner.
Yeah, I think it's going to be.
I've come to know several of your employees very well. Some very nice people. and come to depend on them and their opinion. When you're not here, I can talk to them, and it's, they're trustworthy and knowledgeable. Back to Bloomfield again.
Sure.
Over the years, Bloomfield has certainly changed a lot. We both know you've been here forever, and it's very well known that Bloomfield was originally a farming community, and then after World War II, influx of immigrants changed the character of the town. I'm aware of the influx of a Jewish community that was even before World War II. The influx of African Americans after World War II and the GI Bill, and more recently the influx of Caribbean Americans in Bloomfield. So there's a lot of demographic changes, so that the demographics of Bloomfield now are vastly different from what they were in the, let's say, the 1940s. How has this change affected Bloomfield as far as you can tell?
Overall,
And not even so much just about the changes in Bloomfield.
That's a good question. Overall, I really don't think. I mean, obviously, development has been one. I mean, I have ironically, I have a picture here of around 1950 of a picture right outside of our building, shooting down Park Avenue, of my uncle and a friend of his, Ozzy Maher, delivering newspapers via horseback around 1950 is what the photo is dated, somewhere around 1950.
Oh my goodness.
And you can see down Park Avenue, there's no development at all, really. You can see the telephone poles going down towards the center of town from this picture, and you can see there's no real development there yet. So obviously, the buildup of the developments, and obviously the housing developments, Laurel Park. My father used to talk about, he grew up, between here on the property and next door at 82 Prospect Street. Literally him and his older brother going out to where Bloomfield High School is right now and hunting pheasants. Just walking out the back door and hunting pheasants. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously development, and I really don't believe that it's changed too much other than that. I think Bloomfield's always been kind of an inclusive community. I think it's always been very welcoming. They always talk about in the 1970s, I think it was, that Bloomfield was voted one of the nicest towns in America, and I still believe that to be true now. I think for the most part, you walk through town. I think it's becoming obviously more culturally diverse throughout town. I think you have a much greater mix of people, and I even think I think the apartments bring even more to that. There's a much wider diversity of people coming into town because of the apartments in the center too. So I see a lot more, a lot more foot traffic in the center.
Me too. It's interesting because the term diversity is kind of a neutral term, and it means, of course, but several different kinds of people, or more than one kind of people. In Bloomfield's case, it went from a overwhelmingly white town, Caucasian town, to, as it evolved through the 1960s and 70s and 80s, a greater influx, so much so that Bloomfield High School now is well over 90% African American, or I should say people of color, because there are quite a few people of Caribbean origin. So that that's diversity. But as Francis was just referring to, the new apartments in town are upscale, nice, beautiful. Young people are moving in, and I don't know the demographics there, but I suspect, and from what I've seen about the foot traffic, it's no longer very uniformly black people. and it's kind of getting back to what people like about Bloomfield, the fact that it's inclusive and multiracial. Does that seem to be the case as far as you can tell?
Yeah, for sure. I think, and I think that's been a positive thing about Bloomfield too. I think as as Bloomfield changes, it's still, I think the overall character of Bloomfield has remained the same. I believe that, I mean, maybe the origins of the people are different, but I think the attitude and the sentiment of the people that live here are the same. You know what I mean? So I think that people choose Bloomfield for a reason.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I think it's a certain type of people that choose Bloomfield for a reason.
Yes.
And I think that it attracts a similar mindset of people, no matter what happens to be the color of their skin.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's been my sentiment, and of course it's a sentiment that you can feel good about. But I was hoping that you could verify that for me, and you have. I'll mention one other point, and that is Francis is not only a longtime Bloomfield resident and not only an expert mechanic, but he's also a town councilor for many years. Retired, just recently retired, and it wasn't my fault that he retired. We tried to get him to stay. And Francis will readily admit that he is part of the minority party. Bloomfield is largely a Democratic town. But Francis is a Republican, and a proud Republican too. What's it like being in the distinct minority politically in the town? There are two of you that have been that way, Joe Merritt and yourself, and there are some others now. What's that like?
Well, I mean, so it's interesting. It was very interesting the first time that I ran for town council in 2019, and the reaction I got from a lot of Democrats as being a Republican. It was, and I'm going to use the word interesting, not to really expand on that at all.
That's okay.
But
politics is
but
tough.
I think that if you look to the roots of the Republican Party, and you are I think if you are a person who is open-minded and interested in getting to know other people, I think it's easy to be a Republican. I think some of the greatest friendships I made on my time on town council were actually with people in the Democratic Party.
Well, there's no Republicans, for goodness sakes.
Well, I mean, there's three, and we have a Republican town committee, which is very small, but I mean, it's not very interactive.
Yes. But it's interesting because you seem to have the personality. I've known you for several years now, probably over 10 years, and you seem to have the personality for being able to get along with people very well. You work with the public beautifully, and it must carry through to your workings on the town council. But I have to say, I give you credit, because it's probably tough to be in the minority of anything. I personally have never been in the minority demographically. Politically, I was in the minority once in Teaneck in Teaneck, New Jersey, in the 1960 election. My parents were Republicans, and I had to support Richard Nixon when the whole world in Teaneck was a Kennedy supporter. So I know what it's like. It was tough at the time to be unpopular, but those were different times. This town is is undergoing political change that I can see. Divisions more within the Democratic Party. than between Republicans and Democrats. And our grand old man, I'll call him that, Dick Pierce, who's a former president of the Wintonbury Historical Society, that I'm the president of currently. Dick is the guy to go to. He knows everything about Bloomfield also. Lived here his whole life. And he has told me also during the political discord in town, it was over the naming of the new library going up, that he was encouraged to see this political discourse, because this is how democracy works. And it did not come to blows, although people felt very strongly held an opinion very strongly. And that's a lesson for all of us now in times of division, deep division in the country. I'm confident we'll be able to get through it.
But basically, behind this wall, before the staircase went in, if you come out here, it's tough to see it. You can see there's a garage door there. The center door in the back was the only door. These stairs are coming up. So this is where the family lived, I believe, from 1940-ish to 1950.
The family did?
50-ish. My grandfather was given a dog, and the way it was explained to me was the dog was one of the lineage of the dogs that was being used in the Rin Tin Tin movies back in the 30s and 40s. And it was a German Shepherd. It had broken its tail when it was a puppy, so it could never be used for the movies. The people were raising and training the dogs here in the Bloomfield area and were the customers of the garage at the time. They were making the move to California to be closer to Hollywood, and they didn't have a use for the dog, so they gave the dog to my grandfather. So the dog would actually be like the police dog for the garage. And there's several stories about the dog. It was just phenomenal. He was a very, very bright dog. But there was in the showroom in the 30s, there was a LaSalle, and they couldn't figure out where the dog hair was coming from in LaSalle, because the dog would be here in the garage, protecting the garage. And sometime around that time, my uncle, I guess, had gotten into a car. He was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and the car had rolled across the street. He knocked the car into neutral, and the car had rolled across the street, across Park Avenue. And the dog ran over to the car, opened the car door, and pulled him from the car, and brought him back over.
Oh my goodness!
And the dog. So they figured out that the dog could open the car door. So he would open and close the car door. And then when he heard anybody coming into the garage, would hop out the window of the car. So he was sleeping in the car at night and hopping out. So that was how they figured out. That's how they finally figured out how the dog hair was getting into the car, because they couldn't figure it out.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Huh. You know what I like most about this? The wallpaper. This is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Circa what.
Oh, yeah.
All of the company. It's amazing. Bloomfield Historical Society. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it belongs there.
Oh my!
Because we can't do it justice.
So much.
Broke around in 21 and
Wow.
finally completed it in 23, but it was... They intersect obviously right here. You know, me circa 1985 of Kevin Kennedy, who worked for us from 1979 to 2021.
Oh,
22. That's my mom again, and that's my father back there. This is this is a picture of that Texaco sign I was talking to you about earlier, up there with the post. And this is when we first started selling used cars.
Yeah.
Again, we were always a dealership. Should have you do a phone call with my uncle and talk about the life from the 40s into the 50s. That's the back
new building.
That's the back of the shop.
That's the new building. Oh no, that's the back of the shop.
That's the back of the shop. Yeah, these are all from. These are all the same kind of angle, different angles of the same.
80s, early 80s.
That's the old gas pump island right there.
Oh, you did? I was wondering. Yeah, you must have sold gas here.
It's not the same shot.
Early 80s. I'm thinking maybe mid.
That's a picture of that. If you want a better picture of my father.
Mm-hmm. Your dad and your mom?
My dad and my mom, yeah.
She was quite a bit taller than him.
Yeah. Have you do a phone call with my uncle and talk about the...
Yeah.